In 1848, the people of France bled in the streets to overthrow a king and establish a democracy. 4 years later, those exact same citizens went to the ballot box and voluntarily voted to hand absolute power to an emperor. To understand why a country voted away its own freedom, we must look at the regime that fell in 1848, the July Monarchy. Led by King Louis Philippe, it operated behind a constitutional facade, but in reality, a tiny, wealthy elite controlled the entire nation. Voting rights were tied strictly to property taxes. Out of a population of millions, only about 200,000 men were allowed to vote. When the working class demanded a voice, Prime Minister François Guizot gave a famously cynical reply: "Enrichissez-vous, get rich, and then you can vote." Silencing a population does not erase their grievances. It forces political energy underground, building systemic pressure until the state can no longer contain the release. Since public political rallies were strictly illegal, the opposition found a loophole. They organized the Campagne des Banquets, a campaign of banquets. They disguised massive, subversive political meetings as private dinner parties, and the movement quickly spread across France. In February 1848, the government made a fatal miscalculation by banning a major reform banquet in Paris. Almost immediately, uncontrollable riots erupted across the city streets. The July Monarchy collapsed in a matter of days. King Louis Philippe abdicated and fled to England, while the revolutionaries hastily declared the birth of the Second French Republic. Overthrowing a regime is a straightforward task compared to building a new one. The revolutionaries successfully removed the king, but they created a massive power vacuum, completely lacking a unified vision for what should come next. The new republic immediately fractured into two distinct ideological camps, visible on this map: a densely packed, highly radicalized urban Paris, surrounded by vast, deeply conservative agrarian provinces. And this split happened right in the middle of a severe economic depression. Facing starvation and soaring unemployment, Parisian workers demanded a social republic. They pressured the provisional government to establish national workshops, a system designed to provide state-funded jobs for the urban poor. But the government had to pay for those jobs. To fund the national workshops, they imposed a new 45 centimes tax, levied directly on property and land across the country. Millions of rural peasant farmers were enraged. They were struggling through the exact same economic depression, and now the state was taxing their land to fund what they viewed as idle, radical workers in the capital. When the Republic held its first elections under universal male suffrage, that rural anger dictated the results. The conservative agrarian majority completely overwhelmed the Parisian left, electing a deeply reactionary National Assembly. This new conservative assembly moved quickly to abruptly shut down the national workshops. In response, the desperate Parisian workers revolted, triggering the June Days, a horrific class war fought block by block through the capital. The Republic was tearing itself apart from the inside. Economic resentment had weaponized the newly enfranchised rural electorate against the very democratic institutions they had just won. Stepping directly into this chaos was Louis Napoleon Bonaparte. Freshly returned from exile, he possessed one overwhelming political asset. He was the nephew of Napoleon Bonaparte, and he weaponized the legendary weight of that family name. He ran a campaign designed to appeal to both sides. To the terrified conservatives, he promised a strict return to order and the protection of private property. To the working class, he offered populist rhetoric and sympathy for their economic struggles. This broad coalition delivered him a landslide victory in the 1848 presidential election. He successfully united voters who had literally been shooting at each other in the streets months prior. Once he took office, the government descended into gridlock. Fearing the political left, the conservative parliament passed a law intentionally stripping away universal male suffrage, disenfranchising millions of the poorest voters. Meanwhile, Bonaparte faced a constitutional ticking clock. The law explicitly barred him from seeking a second term. His legitimate time in power was rapidly running out. The parliament's attack on voting rights gave him exactly what he needed. By disenfranchising the poor, the assembly provided a populist autocrat with the moral pretext to justify an illegal power grab. Bonaparte meticulously planned a self-coup, codenamed Operation Rubicon. He launched it on December 2, 1851, a date chosen specifically because it was the anniversary of his uncle's imperial coronation and the military victory at Ostermerz. The execution was swift and tactical. troops occupied strategic points across Paris. The military forcibly dissolved the National Assembly, and top opposition leaders were arrested in their beds before the sun even came up. He aggressively targeted the remaining political leadership. Prominent democratic voices and dissidents were forced to flee France entirely, including the famous writer Victor Hugo, who lived in exile for nearly 2 decades. A successful coup requires both overwhelming military force and the surgical neutralization of political leadership, leaving the public with no one to lead a resistance. To pacify the masses, Bonaparte immediately restored the universal male suffrage that Parliament had revoked, framing his military coup as the defense of the people's rights. There were scattered rebellions in the provinces, but they lacked central leadership. The military, remaining firmly loyal to the president, swiftly crushed these fragmented pockets of resistance. In the aftermath, a traumatized and exhausted public went to the polls. In a national referendum, they overwhelmingly ratified his new authoritarian constitution. Exactly a year later, he was proclaimed Emperor Napoleon III. When a society is sufficiently fractured by severe economic strife and violent class warfare, democratic freedoms lose their appeal. Exhausted citizens will willingly trade their liberty for the simple promise of order.